Welcome to another video discussion of free answer writing practice by Vajiram and Ravi. In this discussion video, we are going to see two questions from GS1 Geography of the syllabus distribution of key natural resources and factors responsible for the location, and one question on current affairs. When we are looking at GS1 Geography as well as society, we do have to understand, we have to make a lot of correlation with the current affairs and static part. Let's see the overview of the question and understand what kind of questions we are looking. Firstly, we have a question about the production of coal. We do understand that coal is a major resource with respect to the energy security of the nation, and thus there are certain issues related to the coal shortage, etc. And that is something which you are going to see in this first question. In the second question, we are going to see challenges with respect to the realization of wind energy sector in India. We do understand that it has immense potential, but there are certain challenges that must be overcome. The third is current affair based question. Over here, we have recently witnessed that how India is investing in semiconductor industries, and thus what are the kind of reasons behind the same. So this is for the current affair question. Let's start with the very first question. Let's read the question together. Despite being a major producer of coal, India still faces coal shortage. Mention reasons for such coal shortage along with measures taken by the Indian government to solve the issue. If you read the question together, the very first statement is giving us the context of what exactly the demand of question is going to be. The question says that despite being a major producer of coal, India still faces coal shortage. In the next part, we will see that the main demand is going to be the reasons, as well as demand 2 is going to be the measures. So this is going to be the heading 1 of the body, reasons for such coal shortage, and heading 2 will be measures taken by the Indian government. In the conclusion, we can talk about certain way ahead and initiatives that can be taken. So let's start with the introduction. In the introduction, you have the opportunity to talk about the context. You can talk about that India is facing recurring power shortage despite enough coal stock. There has been mismatch between demand and supply of the coal. You can also give certain data points, as in India is the second largest producer of the coal and having fifth largest reserve in the world and produces around 893.19 million tons, and despite that kind of production, India still faces coal shortage, as in there are issues with respect to the energy security. You can also talk about that how with respect to power generation, India is heavily dependent on coal, where 50% of the power matrix, energy matrix, is dependent on coal, and that's why coal becomes very prominent with respect to energy security. So this is something in the introduction you can write about. Let's see the body. The very first heading we are going to talk about is the major demand, which is reasons for such coal shortage. You can talk about, in the very first point, rise in electricity demand. There have been various reports where the compounded annual growth rate with respect to the energy demand is hovering around 7 to 8%. This kind of annual growth rate of demand of energy consumption definitely puts a lot of stress with respect to the resource and how exactly we can ensure that coal supply is maintained. The second is flooding of coal mines. We have witnessed that how coal mines have certain kind of structural issues with respect to the flooding, and that definitely impacts the supply of coal for the thermal power plants. Next is rise in imported coal price by more than 40%. This is something because of the regulation of export of coal by China, which was one of the supplier for India, and that kind of regulation is leading to rise in international coal prices. The fourth is inadequate stocks at power projects. We do understand that there are certain logistical challenges, and despite that, the power projects, they do not store sufficient coal at their storage, and along with logistic issues, there are certain kind of shortages. So you can talk about how stocks plus logistical issues. And next is lower generation from other fuel resources. So alternative resources are also limited and there is huge dependency on coal. We have already seen that how 50 percentage, more than 50 percentage of India's energy matrix is dependent on coal. So these are the kind of points you can talk about for the reasons for coal shortage. In the heading 2, you have the opportunity to talk about measures, because this is something as a major demand. You can talk about opening up of coal sector. Now there is 100% FDI with respect to the same. For scheme for harnessing and allocation of koila, transparency in Indian Shakti policy. This kind of policy is also helping with respect to the production of coal. Next is improved connectivity. We do understand that how logistical hurdles can also impact the supply of coal. Therefore, connectivity as in logistics must be ensured, and there are certain initiatives from government side which are ensuring the logistical part of the supply chain. And lastly, push for alternative source of energy. Government has taken numerous initiatives with respect to alternative sources of energy. We have seen ISA for solar energy. We are also looking for hybrid energies model. We are also looking at how green hydrogen is also a potential source of energy. So there are certain kind of alternative sources of energy which government is constantly pushing. So this is something you can talk about in the heading 2 of government initiatives. In the conclusion, you have the potential to talk about way ahead. Over here, majorly you can talk about that how there is need for decreasing the dependency on coal, and focus on renewables. That is diversification. So these are the kind of points you can talk about. You can also talk about India's commitment at United Nations FCCC. So you can talk about those Panchamrit commitments. So that is something you can write in the conclusion of question number 1. Now let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can give brief about the status of coal in India. You can talk about the producer, you can talk about the reserve, you can talk about what exactly we are producing. So these are the kind of points you can talk about. In the heading 1 of the body, you can talk about the reasons for coal shortage, which is the primary demand of the question. You can list down the reasons along with substantiation. Similarly, for government initiatives, you can list down the initiatives and substantiate with examples. And in the conclusion, you can talk about how there is need for diversification to ensure lower dependency on coal. So that is all for question number 1. Let's move to question number 2. Let's read the question number 2 together. What are the current challenges faced in the wind energy sector in India? Suggest some measures to overcome these challenges. So this question, the core demand is with respect to wind energy sector. In the answer, we have to cater the very first demand is going to be the current challenges with respect to wind energy sector in India and measures that can help with respect to bridging those challenges. So that is the major demand. In the introduction, you can talk about India's state of wind energy to give the picture of what exactly the wind energy sector looks like in India. Then in the body, in the first heading, you can talk about the challenges. In the heading 2, you can talk about suggested measures. And in the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead that what should be the next possible thing for us. Or you can also talk about certain government initiatives. So let's start with the introduction. You can talk about India's state of wind energy. Over here, you can talk about that presently the installed capacity of wind energy is around 42 gigawatts. Now, contribution of renewable energy to the overall installed capacity is 30%. Now, over here, we are excluding large hydro projects. And out of that, wind energy is around 34%. And we have to also understand that there are certain targets that we have to reach by 2030, which is the 500 gigawatts of renewable energy, out of which 450 will be from wind. So you do understand that right now we are 42.6. In 2023, we have to reach 140 gigawatts by 2030. So this is something very ambitious, but we do understand that India has potential for that kind of wind energy. So this is something you write in introduction. Then in the body, in the heading 1, you can start with the challenges in producing wind energy. Firstly, you could talk about increased installation cost. Over here, we have to talk about and how there are certain hurdles with respect to installation cost as well as maintenance. So, with respect to wind energy, you have to understand that there are certain kind of infrastructural limitations such as installation and maintenance cost. Next is underutilized potential. Despite having huge coastline, India is not able to realize the potential of wind energy. So that is something which is challenge with respect to producing wind energy. Next is slow capacity addition. Now, when we are comparing the potential, the realization of potential of wind energy in India, we have another issue which is slow capacity addition. Now, we are directly comparing with solar. In the last few years, we have seen that how solar energy is given more weightage compared to the wind energy, and the capacity addition is relatively less than solar energy. Next is neglect of wind energy. Again, over here you can compare with the solar energy as well as with other energy forms, that how there is push for other sources such as green hydrogen, but wind energy is not given the kind of importance that it must be given. Next is non-payment of dues. We do understand that discoms, they are going through certain kind of distress, and because of that kind of distress they are not able to pay the dues, and that definitely disincentivizes the private sector to invest in wind energy. And lastly, there are environmental issues. We have seen that how the windmills, they have certain issues with respect to environment, like we have seen that how it threatens birds. So that is something you can talk about. It also have issues with respect to sound pollution, right? So that is something in the heading 1 you can talk about. In the heading 2, you can cater the next demand, which is measures to overcome these challenges. Over here, you can talk about that how there are certain ways through which we can promote wind energy. Firstly, you can talk about offshore wind. There are various states who have potential to harness the wind energy. We can talk about over here Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, who have extended coastline and that can be utilized for offshore wind projects. Next is promotion of hybrid solar wind projects to ensure that we can get the best of both. Next is renewable purchase obligation. Now, RPO can help with respect to incentivizing the investment in wind energy sector by assuring that the energy produced is going to be collected by the discoms. Next is upgrade turbine. Now over here we are talking about tech upgradation to ensure efficiency and effectiveness. And lastly is international collaboration. We have seen that how India has collaborated with countries such as France to ensure that there is support for technology as well as for research and development. So these are the kind of measures that can be taken to promote wind energy. In the conclusion, you can talk about that how we need to promote wind energy to meet India's Panchamrit commitment. Over here, we have to talk about that how the second commitment, which is 50% of nation's energy requirement, will be met using renewable energy by 2030. Also, you can talk about how there is need for non-fossil fuel based energy capacity to the country to 500 gigawatts by 2030. So this is something you can talk about in the conclusion for question number 2. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can give the status of wind energy sector in India. In the body, in the heading 1, you can talk about the challenges. You can list down the challenges and you can substantiate the same with the arguments. In the heading 2, you can talk about the measures. You can list down the keywords along with the substantiation. And lastly, in the conclusion, you can talk about that how wind energy is something that must be catered to ensure India realizes its commitment. So, this is something you can write for the conclusion of question number 2. That's it for question number 2. Let's move on to question number 3. Let's read the question number 3 together. Semiconductor chips are the lifeblood of modern information age, and India needs to strategically invest in semiconductor manufacturing capabilities. Elucidate. In this question, if you see, the very first statement is kind of the demand one of the question, where you have to talk about that how semiconductor chip are lifeblood of the modern information age, and in the demand 2, you have to cater that India needs to strategically invest in semiconductor manufacturing capabilities, where we can talk about certain challenges that are coming in front with respect to the promotion of semiconductor manufacturing in India. And in conclusion, you can talk about certain government initiatives which are helping with respect to the investment in semiconductor manufacturing capabilities. In the introduction, you can talk about the recent context. You can talk about how India is considering investing 10,000 crore for local chip manufacturing. You can talk about that it is also revising its existing scheme for promotion of manufacturing of electronic components and semiconductors. You can also talk about that how India wants to become a chip making superpower. This is with respect to the reference that how India is making sure that it is leading the manufacturing capabilities for modern information age, and how semiconductor manufacturing industry plays crucial role. So that is something in the introduction you can talk about. In the body, you can talk about the very first demand, as in semiconductor chips acts as a lifeblood of modern information age. Over here, you will talk about the importance of semiconductor industries and chip. You can talk about that how ICT development, as in information and communication technology development, are linked with semiconductor chip. You can talk about even other critical infrastructure which are very dependent on the semiconductor chips. Next is the fourth industrial revolution, and along with the components of the same, such as IoT, is also very much dependent on semiconductor chips. You can talk about how automotive innovation is heavily relied on semiconductor chips, and lastly, we have seen that how healthcare has been disrupted and being effective because of the semiconductor chips. So these are the kind of proof points you can add over here for the heading 1 of the body. In the heading 2, we are going to cater to the next demand, that India needs to strategically invest, and there are certain challenges for the same. So over here, you will talk about the challenges. Firstly, infrastructure requirement. Over here, we have seen that how there is limitation with respect to land acquisition, accessing water, accessing electricity. So these are the kind of infrastructural issues, hurdles that are being faced in India with respect to the installation of semiconductor manufacturing industry. Next is massive investment, as investing can be as high as $1 billion. So that kind of humongous investment is required for installation of semiconductor manufacturing unit. And next is complex value chain. Over here, we have to ensure that raw material along with logistics, they are sorted to ensure that the manufacturing unit is not disrupted because of lack of any of the same. And lastly, there are international events such as recent war of Russia and Ukraine, where we have seen that it disrupted global supply value chain. So these are the kind of challenges that India is facing with respect to installation of semiconductor manufacturing unit. In the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead or government initiative. You can talk about that how there are government initiatives such as Make in India, PLI scheme, DLI scheme, Chips to Startup and Semicon India program, which are actively promoted to ensure that India invests and becomes sustainable with respect to production of semiconductor in the nation. So this is something you can write in the conclusion of question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about how semiconductor industry is growing and there is a huge dependency on the same. You can talk about in the heading 1 with respect to how it acts as a lifeblood of modern information age. And next, in the heading 2, you can talk about the challenges for India with respect to installation of semiconductor manufacturing unit. You can list down the challenges along with proof points, and in the conclusion, you can talk about the way ahead. You can also talk about government initiatives to substantiate your conclusion. So that is all for today's video. Thank you and keep writing.